Big time heavyweight banger coming up this weekend. We have Ben Rothwell taking on Philipe Lins. And Matt, for Monstro, it's been bad in the UFC. I mean, this is a guy that won the PFL Heavyweight tournament not that long ago. And that's the thing, too. You look at it. I mean, he had a great season. He lost to Vadim Nemkov over with Bellator. It's going to happen. He lost to Kleber Silva. It's going to happen. And then you look, and he beats Alex Nicholson. Jared Rosholt, good wrestler, finishes him. Cio Alencar, and then Josh Copeland, the Cuddle Bear. And he wins the season. And he wins $1 million. And it's like, hey, Philipe Lins probably going to compete with the PFL again. But he missed the 2019 season due to injury. He was booked with a one-off spot with Satoshi Ishii, the Olympic caliber wrestler. And then he ends up in the UFC. And he's booked with a teammate in Andrei Arlovsky. And it was like, okay, what's going to happen here? This is weird. You rarely see teammates, let alone heavyweight teammates at American Top Team fight. But that's what happened. And he kind of didn't get started. And then he fought Tanner Boser. And he kind of started to throw the leg kick out there, and then he gets starched. So he's been booked since the Boser fight with Don'Tale Mayes and then Ben Rothwell. And he was injured going into the fight against Mayes, so he had to back out. And then there was an undisclosed injury. I really tried to find answers on this. If somebody knows, drop it down below in the comments section. Topology says undisclosed. Nobody really said who is injured, so I don't know if it was Lins, I don't know if it was Rothwell, but somebody was injured and pulled out of that fight. What I do know about Big Ben Rothwell, Matt, before I hand it over, was if you go and watch the Embedded going into UFC 260, jeez whiz, Stipe Miocic is going on to the plane, and he goes to sit down, and there's Ben Rothwell across the aisle. So they're talking, and there's people in between. And he's like, who are you going to fight? Because he sounds like Boomhauer.
Poor Stipe.
Well. But he does the Boomhauer, and then Ben Rothwell goes, Philipe Lins? And then Stipe's like, who? And neither one of them really know him. The guy's made so much money, but he hasn't looked good in the UFC. And he knows he has to start to pick it up, and I've got a good quotable for later on, but this is a weird fight, Matt.
You sound like every Conor McGregor fan where they're just like, but he made so much money. If only money made... Philipe Lins isn't that good anymore. And was he ever that good? Hey, you could be the judge of that. But if you lost to Vadim Nemkov, who, yes, is very good at 205 pounds, it's a little concerning. And then the run that he went on in PFL, listen, beating Jared Rosholt in 2018 doesn't mean anything to me. I'm sorry. He was a good wrestler at one point, but there's a reason that he got cut from the UFC all the way back in 2015. It's been a while since Rosholt's been relevant to the sport of MMA. Really, he has not been a high-level, really UFC heavyweight ever, an MMA heavyweight for a very long time. The Copeland was nice, don't get me wrong, and the fact that it was a TKO in the 4th round, it's just a nice show from a heavyweight, because we don't really see a lot of those later stoppages in the heavyweight division. But look what he's done in his UFC career. He didn't do anything against Andrei Arlovsky. You're probably like, well, Matt, he did something. Did he, though? He did just kind of stand there and watch as Andrei Arlovsky would sometimes blitz in and throw just a lot more volume than Lins could. But you're right. That's the best way of describing how Lins looked in that fight. He just never got started. And it is a case, we see this a lot, where there'll be a fighter, you have a bad round, and then your corner's like, hey, figure it out, and then you look better.
So, I've got a quotable on this one. Philipe Lins coming into a fight with Ben Rothwell. You know what you're going to get. Oh, the herky-jerky movement that he doesn't really use anymore. Ben Rothwell is pressure, smother, and I'm going to land some uppercuts in the clinch. And if you want to watch the most just boring fight, it's when he fought Ovince St. Preux. And they just kind of moved around. And then Ovince would go back to the cage, and Ben would land a couple times, and it was boring. Then he fights Marcin Tybura, and Tybura smothers him. It was a decent fight. It was better because, listen, I wasn't looking forward to it. But with this fight, I am, because Ben Rothwell, late in his career, you win some, you lose some. Philipe Lins is losing. So again,
I'm calling you out right now, Craig. There's no way you're more excited for this than you are Tybura Rothwell.
Philipe Lins in the UFC has looked like he's been fighting in a mirror. If you watch KB Buller last weekend against Andreas Michailidis, it was like, okay, I'm going to do Taekwondo in front of the mirror now. And he threw axe kicks to nothing, and he threw question mark kicks that meant nothing, and he threw leg kicks just to tap, like Matt practicing pitching out in the yard. I'm just going to throw it against the door. Maybe one day I'll end up in the majors. KB Buller did that. Philipe Lins, it's like, hey, I'm just going to do this in the mirror, land a couple of times, and do nothing. This is the quotable, and he was interviewed by MMA Junkie in the last 4 days. Here it is. It's hard-hitting stuff. He said about Ben Rothwell, he hits hard, has a good chin, doesn't run from a fight. I have to be intelligent when facing him. I need to combine all my skills so I can impose my own game. I can't fall into his and get into a brawl. All right, Felipe, where have you been?
He hasn't been fighting in the UFC. Like, that's just the thing. We've seen a shell of the fighter that we were kind of promised, if you will, coming over from the PFL. And here's the thing.
It's a shame.
A lot of people know that Craig is a bigger PFL fan than myself. I'm not the biggest PFL watcher. But no one proves my point more than Philipe Lins. Because Philipe Lins did look like such a world beater over there. And then you see him against an old Andrei Arlovski, and he looks awful. And then he gets finished by not really a heavy-handed heavyweight in Tanner Boser. And Boser's a decent striker, but it's not like Tanner Boser's known for getting a lot of first-round finishes. More of a decision-oriented heavyweight than he is just some heavy-handed guy. So Lins has just looked awful in the UFC. Unless he does show me some version where I'm like, wow, I'm really surprised. I just don't know how he does beat Ben Rothwell. At least I know what I'm going to get from Ben Rothwell. I'm going to get the forward movement. I'm going to get good output from a heavyweight. Nothing crazy. It's not like he's Max Holloway, but decent output. And he's a guy who has really underrated chokes in the clinch and on the ground. Ben Rothwell's a decent grappler. A lot of people forget he did choke out Josh Barnett. And yes, Josh Barnett was old at the time, but Josh Barnett, yeah, it's one thing to knock out Josh Barnett. Like, that's impressive, don't get me wrong. But if you submit Josh Barnett, who's one of the greatest catch wrestlers of all time, shout out to Shayna Baszler, the only catch wrestler trained, the only female catch wrestler in North America at one point. I'm not sure if that still stands. But aside from the Shayna Baszler facts, I do like Ben Rothwell in this fight. I don't think Ben Rothwell is going to be going in there and beating guys in the top 15. It's not like Ben Rothwell is going to be the guy to go out there and beat, like, the Derek Lewises or the Francis. I doubt he's got one of those runs left in him. But I do think he's going to be able to do enough to beat Philipe Lins. I just think Rothwell, he's going to be in that kind of the Boser category, the Lins category. Like, Rothwell, I don't ever think is going to get past that Tabora, because Tabora right now is number 15. So I don't think Rothwell is ever going to go on a run and get back into the rankings, but I do think he can offer you some fun fights with guys like Lins outside of the rankings.
Matt, when you beat the War Master, you get high praise from Mr. Matt Allen, and if we focus on the odds here, they're close. Rothwell open to -105, he's about a -113. For Lins, he open to -115, he's about a -110. So Lins is slightly favored. If you have a look at the overall Tapology votes, 960 of them, 78% Rothwell. And you got 62% by decision, 30% by knockout. Matt, 2% having to win by submission. If you look at Philipe Lins, he's been knocked out by Kelly Anunson. That one was a knee injury in 2014. Kleber Silva, Vadim Nemkov. Boser knocked him out. What else? That's it. So he's only ever been knocked out. He's never been submitted. Maybe you have an opportunity here. Maybe you like Rothwell by submission. Listen, Ben Rothwell's not the same Rothwell pre-suspension. And if you look at him recently, again, we bring up some of these names, but since he's come back, he's lost to Blagoy Ivanov in a boring fight. Andrei Arlovski, not the most enjoyable fight. He finished Stefan Struve, but let's get it straight. Dan Miragliotta coached him into coming back up after the 2 nut shots. And Ben Rothwell, pretty easy to finish a guy that's been kicked in the cubes twice. And then the OSP fight was the most boring fight I've ever seen.
Okay, stop. No, it was. OSP dropped Ben Rothwell twice in that fight, and Ben Rothwell hit him with a lot of volume. It wasn't that bad of a fight. Like, OSP moving backwards was able to drop Ben Rothwell, and Rothwell was moving into his power. I don't think it's one of the worst fights ever. I just think it was one of those fights where you know what you're getting from Ben Rothwell. This fight's going to go just like how that fight went. Either Lins has enough power to hurt Rothwell as he moves in with his volume, or he doesn't. And honestly, I don't think he does. I don't think Philipe Lins belongs in the UFC, and I think if he loses this fight, it's probably it for his UFC career. So I'm going to go with Ben Rothwell overwhelmingly.
Matt, that's yikes. I'll go with Rothwell. I don't love it. I don't love the fight. This is as much a pop and popcorn fight if I've ever seen one. But Matt used the word overwhelmingly, so take that with the biggest grain of salt. Matt, we're both going with Ben Rothwell. Yikes, to get the win. Big time card coming up. You got Donald Cerrone taking on Alex Morono in the co-main event. In the main event, Michelle Waterson and Marina Rodriguez. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say. Let's get into it.